My name is Ellis Palavidas, and I defend the accused in state and federal court so that they can win back their freedom and reputation. In this video, I'd like to discuss the differences between a state court case and a federal court case so that you have a better understanding of what to expect. This federal court system and the state court system are dual sovereigns. In other words, your conduct can theoretically be prosecuted in both courts. So what you see is that the federal system and the state system ultimately play a complementary role, but a separate role. And the types of cases that you have are going to be very different in terms of how they're investigated, how they're prosecuted, and ultimately how you're sentenced depending on where you fall. So let's start with the investigations. The state court system is designed to respond to emergencies and street crime. So if there's a robbery, a burglary, a murder, you call 911 and police respond. What that means is that those investigations are reactive. We call it a reactive investigation. So they've responded to the crime scene, and then their job is to piece together what happened using the trace evidence that they're able to recover. The federal court investigations, however, are entirely different. They're usually proactive. In other words, they'll pick a target and then they're going to build a case around that target using different investigatory techniques such as wiretaps, surveillance, subpoenas, grand jury investigations. So those two cases are built and investigated in very different ways. That means that it yields a very different set of evidence, which then bleeds into how the cases are prosecuted. So let's look at how the cases are actually prosecuted. In state court cases, because of the types of investigations that they're doing, which is, like I said, the reactive street crime response, you'll typically get more triable cases because when you're trying to piece together what happened in the past, a lot of times there's holes in the evidence. A lot of times there could be issues of mistaken identity. There could be issues of Fourth Amendment violations. So state court cases can be more triable because at the end of the day, they just sort of had to respond and get it together as best as they could. In federal court cases, however, because they've picked a target and they've built a case around taking that target down, what happens is you usually get a lot more voluminous discovery. So you'll get a lot of wiretap transcripts, for example, or you'll get a lot of bank account statements. So the cases are actually more voluminous, and they're also a lot stronger. So it makes it a lot harder to defend those cases because they won't bring those cases until they've got their target where they wanted them. And the target won't even know until sometimes 2, 3, 4 years later that they were even a target in the first place. So in terms of the type of evidence and the amount of evidence, those cases are very different. Now, sometimes you will get federal court prosecutors adopting state court cases. What that means is what started off as a state court case, the feds will then look at it and say, you know what? We like that target. He's been ensnared in the state court system. Let's say there was a car stop, for example, and the guy had a gun. Now they know that this guy's a bad guy and they want to get him. So what they'll do, they'll go to the state prosecutors and say, let me look at this case. We like him. We're going to take him and prosecute him in federal court. Now you're probably wondering, why would we want to prosecute him in federal court? And the reason they'll want to prosecute him in federal court then leads us to the third major difference, which is the sentencing guidelines and the sentencing differences between state and federal court. So in state court cases, the state court guidelines are typically way different. They're much lower sentences. There are so many more cases in state court that the judiciary has an interest in trying to dispose as many of them as they can. There's something like 70,000 arrests in Philadelphia, for example. That's a lot of cases. You have a lot fewer cases in the feds. So what happens is if you're facing a federal court case, you're probably going to be exposed to much higher sentences than you will in the state court case. So that's why sometimes the feds will look at a state court case and say, I'm going to bring this up to the feds because I want to jam this guy up, basically. Now, although they're separate, one of the things that you could tell from what I've already indicated is that they also cooperate quite a bit. And they'll usually cooperate through things called task forces. Now that'll be cases where police officers and detectives from the state court system, from the county police, for example, will be assigned to federal task force agencies. And the reason for that is because the police, the local police, are on the ground and they know what's going on in these neighborhoods and they know who's who. So what they'll do is they'll like to share intelligence with the feds. So what you see is they'll use the knowledge of the locals and they'll add the resources of the feds in order to build cases against worthy targets and then bring them in federal court. So overall, if you're facing a state court case versus a federal court case, you're going to have a very different outcome likely. Why? Because the investigations in the feds are more solid and less reactive, because the cases usually have more discovery as a result of those investigations, and finally, because the sentencing guidelines call for much higher sentencings in the federal court system than the state court system. Basically, it's very easy to get tangled up in the state court system, right? You could be driving down, a cop stops you, jams you up, locks you up. But in the federal court system, if you get caught in the federal court system, it's because the feds and the state prosecutors, the US attorneys, have chosen to bring you there. So you're playing in the big leagues, if you will. So those are the basic differences between the state and federal court cases, and how the outcomes are very different, and why the stakes are ultimately so different. My name is Ellis Palavidas, and if you like this content and would like to see more of it, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.